All about Steve Jobs, the genius who saw the future. Apple, the brainchild shaped by Steve Jobs' hands, became the world's most valuable technology company under his leadership. Apple has defined and dominated the tech world for over a decade. From the simple iPod, the revolutionary iPhone, to the latest Vision Pro glasses. When we touch these devices, we can still feel the boundless inspiration that Steve left behind. The way he managed the company, the way he thought and learned, the way he created and developed products, the way he approached innovation and risk. These are all lessons we can learn from Steve Jobs. He was not just a founder and a leader, but also a guide, inspiring millions of people around the world to pursue their passions and relentlessly seek perfection. On the day Steve Jobs passed away, millions of profile pictures across social media platforms changed to a black Apple logo, accompanied by tweets, status updates, and bouquets of flowers placed in front of Apple stores. In the minds of many, Steve Jobs' image transcended that of a mere manager or an inspirational figure. Steve Jobs' legacy likely extends beyond the iPhones or the praises sung about him. His true legacy is the story of his life. In this video, let's revisit the slices of the cinematic reel of Steve's life. What made this man, a lover of Bob Dylan's music, so extraordinary? First, let's start with the question: what was Steve Jobs' childhood like? What kind of childhood did Steve Jobs have? Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, USA. Steve's father was Paul Reinhold Jobs, who grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin. Paul did not complete high school, dropping out to become a mechanic. At the age of 19, he officially joined the Coast Guard. Steve's mother, Clara, was born in New Jersey, but her family moved to the central area of San Francisco when Clara was still a child. Paul met Clara after being discharged from the Coast Guard. The two built a happy and model family, much like those of the 1950s. However, there was one flaw in their picture-perfect life. Clara was unable to have children, which led them to adopt Steve when he was young. Steve Jobs later learned the truth about being adopted, and the thoughts surrounding this story deeply affected young Steve. When he was 6 or 7 years old, a girl from the house across the street asked Steve, "Were you adopted because your real parents didn't want you anymore?" Jobs ran home crying uncontrollably. But his adoptive parents looked him in the eye and said firmly, "We specifically chose to adopt you. Abandoned, chosen, special." These concepts became part of who Jobs was and even shaped his lifestyle. His close friends believed that these wounds drove Steve to want to control everything he created. But these pains also made him more independent, helping him choose a different path that ultimately surpassed what life had given him from birth. Not only did Paul Jobs give Steve confidence, but he also passed down his love for mechanics and machinery repair to his son. He pointed to a workbench in his garage and said, "Steve, from now on, this will be your workbench." Steve was also impressed by his father's skill and craftsmanship. He loved doing everything perfectly. He cared about the parts that most people usually overlooked. Working with his father in the garage gave Steve his first experiences with electronics and machinery. Additionally, Paul's meticulous nature greatly influenced Steve, fostering in him a passion for creating products with refined designs. 7 blocks away from Steve's house, there was a neighbor who had a profound impact on him. His name was Larry Lang, an engineer working at HP, whom Steve described as a brilliant electronics expert. During one outing with Lang, Steve was introduced to a wireless microphone and speaker system. This was completely contrary to what his father had taught him, that a microphone always needed an electronic amplifier. That was the first time Steve realized a truth. He was smarter and more perceptive than his parents. Not long after, he discovered that his parents had also recognized this truth. Steve grew up torn between two feelings, that of an abandoned child and that of someone special. Perhaps this had a significant impact on shaping his personality later in life. Steve Jobs' college years. The longer he studied, the more Steve proved himself to be an exceptional individual, especially during his final years of high school. Steve experimented with a strict diet consisting only of vegetables and fruits, which made him thin and lanky. He grew shoulder-length hair and a scruffy beard, further emphasizing his eccentric outward appearance. More than 17 years before adopting Steve, Paul and Clara had promised to send him to college, so they saved up enough money. Though not a lot, it was enough for Jobs to pursue higher education after graduating from high school. But things didn't go as smoothly as planned. Steve jokingly said he wouldn't go to college, which provoked a strong reaction from his parents. Steve didn't even care about choosing a school, not even Stanford, a university close to home that likely would have offered him a scholarship. But Steve was Steve. He had his boldness, and he insisted on enrolling at Reed College, a liberal arts school in Portland, with tuition fees among the highest in the U.S. His parents, of course, objected due to the financial burden, but they had to yield to Steve's ultimatum. If I don't go to Reed, I won't go anywhere. At college, Steve delved deeper into the spiritual world. He admitted to being profoundly influenced by many books on this subject, especially Be Here Now, by Ram Dass. The book guided readers into a world of predestination and psychedelic drugs. Jobs' attachment to Eastern spirituality, particularly Buddhist meditation, was not just a passing interest. He pursued it wholeheartedly, as was his nature. This can be seen through Jobs' simple and refined aesthetic sense. In addition to spiritual books, vegetarianism was something Steve pursued during his early college years. The book that inspired this habit for Jobs was Diet for a Small Planet. According to a friend's description, Steve at this time lived solely on Roman meal cereal. He would buy large boxes to last him a week. This habit of Steve's became even more extreme when he read Mucusless Diet Healing System. Believing in a mucus-free healing diet, he thought that eating nothing but fruits and vegetables would prevent the body from producing harmful mucus. This meant he even gave up Roman meal cereal and whole grain breads. Steve's eccentric behaviors, exploring spirituality, meditating, using psychedelics, and practicing vegetarianism, were efforts in his quest for enlightenment during that era. Very soon, Steve felt that Reed was not what he had imagined. He grew bored because he was forced to take courses the school required. Jobs only wanted to study what he was interested in, such as dance classes to satisfy his creative mind, and meet girls. In reality, Jobs didn't want to leave Reed. He just wanted to be free from the courses he found uninteresting. Surprisingly, Reed agreed to his request. The Dean of Student Affairs allowed Jobs to audit classes and stay in the dorms, even after he stopped paying tuition. From that moment, Steve was free to take the courses he wanted. Among them was a course that refined his sense of elegance and later directly influenced Apple's devices: calligraphy. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the spacing between letters, and how to make stylized letters more striking. Calligraphy is beautiful, classical, and artistically rich in a way that science cannot capture, and I found it fascinating. Steve shared about the calligraphy course. This is clear evidence that Steve was a harmonious intersection between two circles, one of art and the other of technology. Steve's friend from high school, Wozniak. Although Wozniak was 5 years older than Steve, the two shared common interests in technology and music. In terms of understanding electronic design, Woz was far ahead of Steve. At an age when Steve was still puzzled about the carbon microphone his father couldn't explain, Woz was already using transistors to build communication systems. If Steve was the soul, Woz was the heart that created Apple. The 1960s were years of technological explosion in America. Military contractors, followed by electronics companies, microprocessor manufacturers, and video game designers, gave rise to a new culture tied to modern technology. But there were also children who felt lost during this transition. This created a wave of rebellious counterculture on the other side. Initially, the tech community and the rebellious kids didn't get along well. Many members of the counterculture movement viewed computers as suspicious tools that could take away the freedom of life. However, by the early 1970s, society saw a shift as many analysts proved that computers were gradually becoming symbols of individuality and freedom. Giant corporations at the time treated computers in a rigid, standardized manner, but the counterculture crowd saw things differently. Those sandal-wearing, drug-using rebels viewed the world in their own unique and defiant way. They were the ones who shaped the 21st century. In January 1975, the first personal computer was introduced in a magazine called the Altair. It consisted of a block of components soldered onto a simple circuit board, but tech enthusiasts who saw the Altair understood that it signaled the dawn of a new era, the era of personal computers. 2 months later, Woz had the chance to see this computer firsthand. The Homebrew Computer Club was seen as a fusion of the tech movement and counterculture. The club's first meeting took place on March 5, 1975, with a session dedicated to unveiling the new Altair computer. Woz attended this meeting, which became one of the most significant evenings of his life. Woz obtained the technical specifications for the Altair's microprocessor, and it was as if a light bulb went off in his mind. He began designing a terminal device with a keyboard and screen, capable of connecting to a remote minicomputer. Woz used a microprocessor in the device, giving it some of the capabilities of a remote minicomputer. A keyboard, a screen, and a computer, all integrated. The entire idea of a personal computer came to me, he said. That night, I started sketching on paper what would later be known as the Apple I. Jobs was extremely impressed when he learned about Woz's computer. Jobs eagerly jumped in to help refine certain aspects related to memory. However, Woz was naive and believed in the philosophy of the computer club. The club's theme, he said, was help others, but Steve didn't think that way. He didn't accept the idea that Wozniak's inventions should be free. That was the difference between the two. Woz always placed himself in an average position, but Steve always had room for his ambition. In the end, Woz was persuaded by Steve. The two began working on their first commercial computers. These were fully integrated machines, designed to be user-friendly, making a foreign device feel familiar and necessary for every household at the time. With Woz's superior technical skills and Jobs' brilliant leadership and reality distortion vision, the two ushered in a new era of personal computers. As for the birth of Apple Computer, who would have thought of such a ridiculous combination? It didn't even make sense. That was Steve. The name reflected who he was. Apple was the fruit he chose for his strict vegetarian diet. Paired with the word computer, the name gave a sense of friendliness, joy, and vitality to a lifeless block of machinery. On April 1, 1976, Apple Computer was founded with 3 shareholders, Steve Jobs, Stephen Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne. But shortly after, Wayne left, leaving the Apple ship for the 2 Steves to steer. Woz was given the primary responsibility for managing electronics engineering, while Jobs handled business and marketing. The Apple I was first introduced by Jobs and Woz at a presentation at the Homebrew Computer Club. Woz showcased what made the Apple superior to rival computers: a user-friendly keyboard and all components integrated. Very few in the audience paid attention to Apple's product, but among them was Paul Terrell. Paul was the owner of a computer store chain called Byte Shop. He was quite impressed with the Apple I and decided to order 50 units. After discussing with Jobs, Apple Computer had its first order. Jobs' home in Los Altos became the assembly point for the 50 Apple I circuit boards. All available manpower was mobilized, including Jobs, Woz, high school friend Daniel Kotke, Jobs' ex-girlfriend Elizabeth Holmes, and his younger sister Patty. Steve didn't just produce 50 computers for Paul's order. He also made an additional 50 to sell to friends and 100 for retail. The wholesale price agreed upon by Jobs and Paul was $500 per Apple I, but for retail, Jobs raised the price to $666.66, a figure he chose because it was 3 times the production cost. The success of the Apple I didn't just come from being one of the first personal computers sold on the market, but also from the way Jobs and Woz approached sales and product marketing. With a price of $666.66 and products that were not only technically powerful, but also excelled in design and user experience. Learning from the Apple I, Steve Jobs and his team created the revolutionary Apple II computer. Jobs recognized the importance of a complete, fully integrated computer with all features included. Apple executed this task well. Over the 16 years since its launch, nearly 6 million Apple devices were sold, ushering in the personal computer industry. At that time, Apple became one of the pioneering companies in Silicon Valley, and Steve remained the chairman and CEO of his brainchild. But Steve seemed to struggle with the ever-growing mantle of responsibility. The pressure gradually revealed his temper and childish behavior. Steve wouldn't hesitate to call products made by employees trash. Jobs also had hygiene issues. He continued to maintain a strict vegetarian diet and believed it would allow him to not shower frequently. Occasionally, to relieve stress, Jobs would wash his feet in the toilet, an action that was far from pleasant. Tension also arose in the relationship between Woz and Steve. Woz hated Steve's childish behavior and the conflicts he caused during the design of the Apple II. Woz clashed with Steve, believing the machine needed 8 slots to allow users to connect additional peripherals. Steve wanted only 2 slots. This time, Woz stood firm and didn't compromise. In the end, Woz's idea was accepted, but he also felt his authority being overshadowed by Steve and the company. Jobs' desire to control Apple and his reckless attitude toward power were indeed a problem for the board of directors. Perhaps Steve lost control while carrying the burden of an Apple growing too fast. Or perhaps this was simply who Steve was. The departure in 1985. Apple had truly become a giant in the electronics world. Devices that captivated hearts, such as the Apple II, Apple III, Lisa, and Macintosh, elevated Apple's reputation. Naturally, Jobs' fame followed. However, beneath the dazzling light of success, the shadows of disagreement and conflict began to emerge. The Macintosh was born amid such conflict. Steve used what people often called his reality distortion field to create a Macintosh computer that was elegant on the outside and immensely powerful on the inside. He wanted everything done by January 1982, a year ahead of schedule. "That's insane. There's no way we can do that," was the reaction of the Macintosh development team when they heard Jobs' demands. But strangely, the entire team seemed to fall into Jobs' trap. One day, Jobs stormed into the room of an engineer developing the Macintosh's operating system and complained that the system was taking too long to boot. The engineer, Ken, began to explain, but Steve cut him off. "If it could save someone's life, would you shave 10 seconds off the boot time?" Steve asked. Ken said he could. "Well, if 5 million people use the Macintosh, and you could save 10 seconds on boot time every day, that would save 300,000 hours per year, equivalent to hundreds of lives saved annually." Ken was truly impressed. A few weeks later, he returned, and the Macintosh booted 28 seconds faster than before. Even later, Steve continued to use this method to highlight impacts on a grand scale. Many believe the roots of this behavior stemmed from Jobs' childhood. From a young age, he distorted reality with his stubborn personality to achieve what he wanted. As he grew up, Steve used this ability more and more in his work. The way Jobs used his reality distortion field in work wasn't just about imposing his will on others. It was also how he ignited belief and passion in each individual. He always found ways to stimulate creativity, encouraging his team to see what could be, not just what currently was. Wozniak understood this. Jobs' reality distortion field was evident when he came up with an illogical plan for the future, like when he told me I could design the breakout game in just a few days. We knew it was impossible, but somehow he made it possible. Or during the creation of the iPhone, Apple made a breakthrough by unveiling a mobile device with multi-touch capabilities, a technology so foreign when competitors at the time were still loyal to physical keyboards. Not only at Apple, but Steve also knew how to apply this behavior to his partners. In the search for a glass manufacturing partner for the first-generation iPhone, Jobs met with leaders at Corning Glass. There, he was introduced to a type of glass called Gorilla Glass, known for its durability and strength. However, because they couldn't find a market, Corning had shelved the product. Yet Jobs demanded that Corning produce as much as possible within 6 months. Initially, Corning's leadership was shocked, but then Corning mobilized its best scientists and engineers to make Jobs' request a reality. Steve was right. His reality distortion field truly worked. The only problem was that Jobs didn't seem to realize this behavior was also distorting his own soul. In Steve Jobs' soul, the obsession with perfection wasn't just a personality trait. It was a core principle, guiding every decision. However, within Steve, there were many contradictions. If you chase 2 rabbits at once, you won't catch either. Steve pursued perfection in both the Macintosh and in the way he ran the company, and that was inevitable. Those who stood by Steve, including Wozniak, recognized this problem as early as the launch of the Apple I. Apple needed a chairman experienced enough to grow, not a Steve who would often lose his temper or burst into tears during arguments. As the Macintosh developed, tensions between Jobs and Scully, Apple's CEO at the time, continued to escalate. Scully was appointed Apple's CEO in 1983. Steve Jobs had recruited him from PepsiCo to help Apple transition from a startup to a major enterprise. The first time Scully visited Apple, he was extremely impressed by Apple's work culture, a rustic and relaxed atmosphere, much like Steve Jobs' style. He also liked Scully's understanding, and the two quickly became close friends, but not long after, Steve realized it was all an illusion. Jobs believed Scully wasn't a product person. He didn't even try to understand the core aspects of the products they were creating. Conversely, Scully thought Steve was too focused on minor details of the devices. He believed this obsession would backfire. The two also clashed in how they treated employees in the company. Steve, when the Macintosh disappointed by achieving only 10% of projected sales, became frustrated and angry, blaming everyone. He used those around him as an outlet to vent his frustration. In contrast to Scully's calm demeanor, he wanted to avoid direct confrontations with Jobs and maintain harmony, caring about relationships. Tensions continued to escalate. Jobs and Scully fought over control of the Macintosh development division. Realizing that hiring this CEO was a mistake, Steve schemed to rally the board to oust Scully, but it was too late. A year earlier, Jobs and Scully had flown to Cambridge, Massachusetts, to visit Edwin Land, the founder of Polaroid and Steve Jobs' idol. Jobs had said, "All Edwin did was help transform millions of mediocre people, and they kicked him out of his own company." Now, Scully had done the same to Jobs. On Friday, May 24, 1985, Apple's board meeting took place. The coup plan had been exposed. Jobs had to confront Scully directly to determine his fate. Jobs still insisted that Scully didn't understand Apple and that Scully should leave the company. "I wanted you here to help me grow, and you haven't helped me at all," Scully said, losing his composure under Steve's pressure. He began to stammer and made a big gamble. He held a poll of the entire board. "Me or Steve? Who do you vote for?" Even later, Steve still fumed when recalling. He was so terrifying in that situation. Only an idiot would vote for me. And indeed, that was the case. Although everyone respected Jobs, they all chose Scully. Jobs was kicked out of his own company. He walked out of the room, with no one following him. In the days that followed, Jobs sat in his house for hours on end. He played Bob Dylan's music, especially the song "The Times." They are a-changin'. The return of Steve Jobs. In Greek mythology, Prometheus was a special god. Prometheus created humanity from clay, nurtured them, and taught them everything from astronomy to agriculture. Prometheus loved his children more than his father, Zeus, so he stole sacred fire to give to humanity. This action enraged Zeus. Zeus then punished Prometheus by chaining him to a rock, where an eagle came daily to eat his liver, which would regrow each night to repeat the torment. Eventually, Prometheus was rescued by Hercules, a hero of humanity. If anyone could empathize with Prometheus, it would be Steve Jobs. Just as the Titan brought fire to humanity, Jobs brought to the world technologies and products that changed how we live, work, and communicate. Both faced opposition and punishment from higher powers. Prometheus from Zeus, and Jobs from Apple's board of directors. The similarity between them also lies in their deep love for their children. Prometheus loved humanity, the creation he molded from clay, and sacrificed himself to bring them knowledge and power. Jobs, though he didn't create humans, created groundbreaking products and poured all his love, passion, and vision into them. Both Prometheus and Jobs endured suffering for their choices and actions, but they are also remembered as innovators and bringers of light. Prometheus' suffering under the eagle's claws symbolizes the steep price creativity sometimes demands. Similarly, Jobs went through dark times, from being fired from Apple to the challenges of building Next and Pixar. And finally, just as Prometheus was rescued by Hercules, Steve also had the chance to return to Apple. His return was an emotional event beyond words, said Jim Carlton, a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. The entire auditorium stood up, erupting in applause, whistles, and cheers as they witnessed Steve's return to Apple after more than a decade. He came back to save the company, to save his child that was on the verge of collapse. Since the day Steve walked out of that boardroom, Apple seemed to lose its creative spark. Revenues declined, and increasingly fierce competition from Microsoft and other PC manufacturers left the company in a precarious financial state. Apple's products no longer made a significant impact on the market. The entire company realized they needed a new source of inspiration, a strong leader with a groundbreaking vision who could bring the company back to its leading position. Who else could it be but Jobs at this moment? Jobs no longer clung to power as he once did. Jobs returned initially as a part-time consultant while continuing to run Pixar, the animation company he founded after leaving Apple. But amid a faltering board, Steve's voice still carried special authority. The first mark Steve left after returning to Apple, which the public felt, was perhaps the Think Different campaign. It was special right from the name. If written grammatically, it should have been Think Differently, but Jobs wanted to use different as a noun. Beyond the commercial aired on television, Steve also executed one of the most memorable print ad campaigns in history. Each newspaper ad featured a black and white portrait of a historical figure, with the Apple logo and the words Think Different. Most of them were Jobs' personal idols, representing creativity, risk-taking, and dedicating their lives to working differently. Steve once again reignited the creative flame that Apple had lost. He began to dive deeper into his child. Steve Jobs became Apple's interim CEO in 1997 and later officially took on the CEO role in 2000. With power in his hands, he made changes to shape Apple's future. He cut numerous inefficient projects, focusing resources on a few products capable of delivering breakthroughs. First and foremost, the iMac, launched in 1998 with its unique design and vibrant colors, quickly became a symbol of innovation and helped restore Apple's morale and image. Following the iMac's success, Jobs continued to lead Apple through fresh and risky projects, including the iPod, iTunes, iPhone, and iPad. Each product ushered in a new era for the industry and consumer habits, from how we listen to music to how we communicate and access information. The success of these products not only solidified Apple's leadership in the tech industry, but also turned the company into one of the most valuable brands in the world to this day. It would be reckless of me to dare draw any conclusions about Steve Jobs as a person. His greatness far exceeds what words can describe. But if I had to choose an image to represent Steve, I would pick a painting of the yin-yang circle, an image Steve encountered while studying Be Here Now. At first glance, one might think it represents contradiction, much like how Steve viewed the world in a binary way. Either a product was amazing, or it was trash. Either you were a genius, or you were worthless. He once criticized former President Obama, saying he had leadership issues because he didn't want to upset people or make them angry. Yes, that's not a problem I have, Jobs said, being much stronger than that. He had a unified ideal in how he viewed things, and it was this strength that drove him to push his employees. Jobs elicited excellence from those around him by challenging them, sometimes to the point of harshness. He created an environment where everyone had to face the challenge of rising to become the best version of themselves. Beyond the contradiction, the contrast between white and black, between two extremes within one entity, the painting also evokes the importance of harmony. Steve was the harmony between a genius engineer and a true artist. His hands turned rough technologies into devices of refined beauty, and Apple fully inherits that spirit in every product they create, from the curved lines of each iPhone to the fonts displayed to users. They are imbued with pieces of Steve Jobs' personality. Passion, perfectionism, cunning, a thirst for artistry, boldness, and even his obsessions. Jobs was also a master of marketing with his seamless storytelling ability. He knew how to craft a story around a product, turning it from an inanimate object into an emotional experience, connecting with customers on a profound level. The 1984 Macintosh ad is a prime example. The crowd, upon first watching it, jumped up, screamed, and punched the air in excitement. But if we strip away all the glamorous layers, Steve Jobs was still a child carrying an immense desire to create, a passion to build products that could break all boundaries. On August 24, 2011, Jobs had to accept the reality that he no longer had the strength to return to his role as Apple's CEO and handed the position to Tim Cook. In the final chapters of his life, Jobs battled an incurable cancer, but even in that state, he still kept thoughts of what technology he could improve in his mind. So, what is Steve Jobs' legacy? Surely, each individual will have their own perspective when fully exploring the story of his life. Even long after, people still revisit the story of Jobs' life, a story of a great inventor, a true artist, or a boy with boundless passion. As for Steve Jobs, in an interview with Walter Isaacson on the evening of August 24, the day he stepped down as Apple's CEO, when asked how he felt about giving up control of the company, Jobs replied, "I've had a very fortunate career, a very fortunate life. I've done all that I can." I hope you enjoy this video about Steve Jobs' life. Don't forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons to support us.